Hey, everybody, before we get into this next podcast, I was a dumbass and I forgot to do the ad reads, so we're going to do it now real quick. We've got Eberlestock.com, so any kind of bag solution that you possibly need, whether it's military, hunting, a tech apparel or anything like that, like they've got you covered. Definitely go check them out. The promo code, though, if you're looking for a 10% discount, which why wouldn't you want a 10% discount?
Of course.
I mean, I like discounts. But it is OR Oscar Romeo 10. And then that'll get you that discount. And then, Trent, we got something else too, right?
Well, I just want to say, like the hoodies and like stuff like that, the apparel over at Eberlestock, they've really put a lot into it in their gloves and everything else like that. So it's not just bags anymore; it's everything that you could possibly need. And speaking of everything you could possibly need, if you're looking to get into the pipeline, you're looking to train like Operator Peaches over here. Where you go to Ataclete.com. They got everything that you need to start your training journey the right way.
Yeah,
I think that should be their motto. Start your training journey the right way.
Start your training journey. You're welcome, guys.
I got crystals and stuff in here. Everything's a journey when you got crystals, and you guys will understand why we had to do this afterwards. But once you watch the podcast, because it's ridiculous good
for sure. So definitely, check out Ataclete.com, and then, but yeah, that I always love talking to him. It's fantastic.
Like
you
is
said,
the code Onesready for Ataclete? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, it is Onesready for Ataclete. I'm sorry, I was just started reflecting on talking to Colonel Buller. So, like I said, it's always good. And now Trent's so motivated, he's going to go out and crush all his coworkers.
I'm so motivated.
He's coming for you, Wink. He's coming for you.
Hope y'all enjoy the podcast.
Later. Hey everybody, welcome back to the team room. You are with the Onesready crew, Trent and I, and then we have a special guest, somebody that I've known for a really long time now at this point. I think 2001, 2002. So we have retired. I know, no kidding. Retired Colonel Col Buller. So appreciate you joining us, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Peaches. Trent, thanks for having me, guys. Welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just say it. You have a pretty colorful career, and I definitely don't want to step off on a bad note already, but we'll follow it. But I do want to say, from a fellow Oompa Loompa, short people problems, you look pretty tall in that office right now, but I think we know the truth. You and I are battling for the shortest CCT ever. So I think I still have you beat, but we'll go on from there. So, sir, if you don't mind giving us a little background about yourself, where you came from, and how you found CCT.
Yeah, you bet, man. So thanks for the intro. First off, my scouting report does say 6'2", 220, but it is a bit of an exaggeration, man. It is what it is. Before I tell you about my background, I'd like to tell you guys a quick story about your namesake, Onesready, if you don't mind, okay? And someone might have already told a similar story, and if it is, man, I apologize. But so I'm back at NDOC. It's 1991. I'm in my first class, and we can have a conversation about why it took me 2 classes, but it had something to do with my scouting report and the inability to swim 4,000 meters in 80 minutes, right? But so we're doing underwaters, and for those that aren't familiar with the community, we do 25 meter. You push off and you go underwater for 25 meters, and then you swim back on the surface for 25 meters, and then it just depends on where you're at in the process for what your interval is. I think you start at 2 minutes. Interval every 2 minutes they say go, and you get down to a minute and a half is what I think the standard is, and by the time you graduate you're doing a minute and a half, and it's like up in the 20s. And honestly, a lot of guys, that's their favorite part of the session because they're really good at moving water. Peaches, you and I, we don't move quite as much water, so it was always a struggle for me. So I'm always holding on and trying to recover on the way back, because once I get to the wall, man, it's warned. Right again, right? But anyway, so it's early in the process. Probably week 1, week 2. Mike Maltz, rest in peace. He was my proctor. We lost him in a helicopter crash in Jacobabad, Pakistan in 2002 with a PJ that I didn't know, Jason Plight, but I knew Mike well. And we're probably a week in, and I don't know what the number was. It was 10 or 12. It was pretty low, and it was doable, but we're all holding on. And we get to the wall, and we all yell 10s, and Maltz goes, "Onesready." And everybody, we're all like, "Whoa, we're done." And I hear this voice down the wall that goes, "But Sergeant, that was number 10. And he just, Maltz just sits there and he goes, "Go." And he just looks at us, and we all realize, oh man, we're not done yet, right? So I get down there, I push off the wall, and man, I'm telling you, the strangest thing happened. Dudes that we're making it without any issue, we're popping. You know, I mean, I'm sitting there and I'm just stroking and I'm trying to get back into the groove. I'm trying to get back into it. And I'm looking around and guys that were money in the water are popping early, and we get back and everyone's thinking it's a mistake. One's, or eat it, go. And man, we just kept going, and we probably went for 30 minutes. And some of the best, strongest guys in the pool popped. And I share that with you right away. One, it's your namesake. One's ready, two's ready, three's ready, depending on how many folks are in the pool. Unfortunately, it whittles down to one or twos as we get smaller and smaller. But that's because the ones don't learn the lesson, the ones that can't learn the lesson, that is this right here, that it's not over until it's over. Like, they think it's supposed to be fair. They think, hey, man, Sergeant Mulch says we're going to do 10 today, or we're going to do 22. It's not fair that we did 23 or 24. And I think that's clearly one of the things that our pipeline is there to teach us, is that it's not over until it's over. And then you transition that down range. And I've seen it with general purpose forces as we come off target, us, you know, our special operations, and regardless of the community, because they all get us ready, man. As soon as we load up, man, we are resetting our gear. You know, if our ruck got a little sideways, whatever it is, we are resetting. And quite honestly, some of the lesser experienced, maybe general purpose forces, you know, our soldiers that are out there that are providing security for us, they're high-fiving and they're settling back thinking that they're done for the night. And we know we're not done until we're done. And quite honestly, even when we get back to the FOB, man, we're resetting gear. We're cleaning our gear. We're cleaning our rifles. We're restoking batteries. For us JTACs, we're updating our logs and turning in our sit reps. And then we go get chow. And then maybe it's over after the hot wash, you know, then maybe we get an opportunity to reset. But by the time we lay down and do, you know, hygiene and rest, you know, as a priority of work, we're ready for our number to be called again. That's where we learned that early in NDOC. And I've translated it out of the pool in a lot of different ways. So I get to coach wrestling quite a bit now. And the wrestlers, all that, they're looking for a fair deal. And I tell them the only thing fair in the sport is the weigh-in, and that's only if you're using the same scale. And after that, man, you got to take it as it comes. And I understand the idea that things are supposed to be fair, but man, no one promised us a fair deal. What they promised us at NDOC, of course, is to weigh and measure us and give us a shot to see if we're worthy to be able to transition to the teams and go down range and fight fight on behalf of our country, our teammates, and our beliefs. So anyway, when I saw your Onesready podcast, that's a story that jumps into my mind. I use it on occasion to try to teach some of our younger men and women that, hey man, don't ever tap out, man. Like you always got to be in the game. So anyway, thanks for letting me open with that.
We've been doing this for almost 3 years, actually 3 years now, and that's probably the best articulation of mental preparedness and be ready for anything, and don't, you know, life is not fair, kind of thing like that. That is the best articulation. It's the
willingness, right? Yeah. That's what you search for in those moments when you run past the gym or you just keep going. I want to see who's willing to keep going. Yeah. You know, when I say go, like, who are the guys that just go, that just realize that no matter what, I'm going to do it. So
that's right, Trent. And really, I think one of my greatest strengths is the lack of size, you know, Jared, because it was never easy. You know what I mean? So, and I'm always been a bubble guy in this business, especially because everything's heavy. You know what I mean? They don't make smaller radios for smaller dudes, right? And so because of that, man, you just can't afford to mentally check out. Like if for all of us, our mental capability is our strongest asset, and that doesn't matter what size you got. So you got to make sure you're always using it. That, and of course the will, the heart, and then that all comes in all kinds of sizes as well. So anyway, thanks for letting me open up with that. You had asked a little bit about my background. I grew up in Virginia. My old man is retired Chief Master Sergeant. He and my mom are both buried in Arlington National Cemetery. And then I've got two big brothers and a sister, and they've all served in different capacities. You know, we're the siblings. We're all real close. I went to the Air Force Academy. I went there to wrestle. Probably admittedly, I was a better high school wrestler than a college wrestler, but, you know, I did the best I could on the mat and grinded it off. And, you know, at the time, all you want to do is win on the mat. But as you get a little bit older and you get more reps, you really learn the big matches are off the mat. And the things that I learned in such a difficult sport really transitioned into victories off the mat. And I'm certainly grateful for that. And I enjoy watching the Academy wrestling team right now. In fact, one of my son's best friends is wrestling there as a freshman, and Coach Barber and his entire coaching staff I'm good friends with. I get to go back every summer to help out with their wrestling camp, not because of my wrestling skills on the mat, but really just the opportunity to work with the wrestlers off the mat every night and talk to them about core values and some of the things that we've learned just through, through our experiences. But anyway, I think probably what's interesting when you talk about our height challenges is my senior year, I was planning on going to pilot training. I had a waiver from my standing height. And then my senior year is 1991. They had too many pilots. It was a bathtub. And they were banking so many pilots that they went back and reassessed all the waivers. And all the guys too big for the cockpit, which is really your football players, had a strong lobby. So they all got their waivers. And all the girls that were too small, a male gymnast and myself, our lobby group just wasn't quite as strong. And we lost our waivers. So there I am, second semester, senior year. And job career has already come and gone. There's only a few AFSCs left. And this whole time, man, I was grinding. I thought I knew where I was going to go. And somebody had told me about combat control, and we had knew, like, it wasn't clearly as advertised as it was now. We had known about the Red Berets on occasion. You see somebody, but it's not like you could go on and get a podcast or a Facebook or anything like that, man. You just didn't know that much about it. In fact, somewhere around here, I still got the old black and white pamphlet that somebody gave me. He's like, man, why don't you look into this? And much like the current process now, I think I put together a phase 1 package and submitted it and got invited out a month later. In fact, it was during my spring break, my senior year. I went out to Pope Air Force Base, tried out, and was selected. And when I graduated the Air Force Academy, I went right into the pipeline. And man, I guess the rest is history. So, my faith tells me God's got a plan for us, but whether you're faith-based or not, man, when one door closes, you just got to keep your head up and keep driving forward and look for other doors to open. And, I think this was God's plan for me all along. But again, not to proselytize, regardless of faith, when something's not there for you, man, you just keep grinding out, and I think good things happen for you.
Well, I mean, when you saw, sir, those Red Berets and the pamphlet, what was it about it that got you? It was limited knowledge and data. So, like, what were you trying to accomplish? Like, what were your expectations? Because it was a different game back then with how much you actually knew before you stepped through that door and started putting yourself out there for it.
That's a great question, Trent. So my freshman year, we actually had an enlisted CCT come in and as part of the dually class. His name was Max Johnson. I ended up bumping into him again down at the 2-3. He didn't make it through his freshman year, but I remember like our first warrior day or whatever day it was in the academic year, and we're all back in. They were the olive drab BDUs, so not even the camouflage, but it was just an olive drab. And we're all walking, and we got this tuck, and you have to walk kind of this certain way at the academy. You got to follow these certain lines when you're a smack, and you got everybody that goes by, you got to report in. Anyway, I'm hustling to school, and I fall in right behind Max Johnson, like right behind Cadet 4th Class Johnson. I didn't know him, but everybody knew of him because he was a really big dude. And on Warrior Day, I guess he decided he was going to wear his beret. And no one was going to tell him otherwise. And I remember I tucked right in on his wake. I was in his shadow, just a monster of a young man, right? And nobody messed with us, man. Like, I just blew right on his coattails. And I just remember seeing the back of the beret, like, man, that is badass, And at the time, we had heard a little bit about CCT, but we just knew it was cool. We certainly didn't know everything I knew about it then. And unfortunately, Max didn't make it, and I bumped into him back down at Hobart Field years later. But it started off with just kind of this aura of this thing that's really cool. And then really I didn't think much about it during my time there because I thought I was going to go fly, fight, and win, right? And then when everything came crashing down, that's when somebody brought it back to me. And when I looked at the pamphlet, it seemed like right up my alley of, being on the ground and jumping out of airplanes. Little did you know that the ruck is always heavy, the water is always cold, the jumps were always at night. Like, that stuff doesn't make the pamphlet. But quite honestly, those are the good missions. When we go, scuba diving down at St. Croix to look at bugs, that's fun, but it's not the stuff that I remember. It's the hard ones that I remember going through with guys like you. So, yeah, Trent, that's it.
Yeah. That's always the type 2 fun is the lasting memories is the good stuff. So when you went to phase 2 and somewhat during NDOC as well, one of the big, the things that people talk about now is their why. Everybody's like, you have to have this huge why. Now, personally, I never had like a single thing that got me through every situation. Like I had situational whys and motivations. But what were some of those things for you that got you through, those hard moments in training?
I think it was my ego and the desire to not fail. Because at that time, I really didn't even know what I was trying to get into. I just knew I thought it was badass. And the cadre all walking around seemed like the types of guys that I would like to spend time with. And I bring up ego because oftentimes ego is the enemy, right? Like you want to check it at the door, but I think God he made us in his image, and man, I think he gave us an ego. And then the real dilemma is, when do you use it and when do you put it in check? And, once I showed up, clearly when you look around the room, I didn't look like everybody else. We make this mistake of going around the room. You're like, he's going to make it. He doesn't stand a chance. He's going to make it. He doesn't stand a chance. And guys are looking at me like, there's no way that little guy's going to make it. Right. So really, just as I started getting into it, it just came to this idea, like, man, I don't want to fail. I liked the physical nature of it, and I just didn't want to fail. So I did everything I could to try not to. Quitting wasn't an option. And I'd like to talk about quitting with you guys here in a second. I got another story from NDOC about somebody that did quit. But I did wash out on my first class, and it was devastating. It was 8th week, and it was 4,000 meter fin swim, and I missed it by 61 seconds. But quite honestly, man, I was just holding on by a thread in all of the water events. The land events were solid for me. And talk about suppressing your ego. I had to start backing off on the land events just to save my energy for the fins and some of the other things. Where I'd like to go crush the run, and my ego would get in the way and show everybody that I thought I was one of the fastest. I had to settle into a pace that allowed me to meet standards, so that I could try to meet standards in the water. And man, I share that with you because it's not a fun thing to say that all you're trying to do is meet standards. Like guys like us try to crush the standard. We try to be the standard. But that's what maturity gets you, and reps get you. You realize the game's a lot harder than what you might have thought when you were younger. And you want to stay in the game. And then there's times when you really gotta increase it. And I say that sheepishly because, man, I tell all the young men and women that are thinking about getting ready for this, man, you got to go after 110% on everything. And I think you got to do that in training. And then when you get there, you got to listen to your instructors that really care about you, because they're the ones that are like, hey, Butler, they call me Butler. Hey, Butler, man, I'm not sure coming in first place in the run does anything for your fin. And really, they weren't telling me to back off, but they were trying to wisen me up a bit, So anyway, Trent, man, I think it's just this desire to not fail. And then it's just such a beautiful dilemma when everything drives you. If you turn everything into a competition because your ego, you become a real pain in the ass too. Like no one wants to be around you. Like there's times you get after it, and there's times to be side by side, and look after your brothers and your sisters. So I think that's kind of what motivated me. But since I opened the door on this idea of quitting, you mind if I talk about it? Because I know that some of your demographic are folks that are getting ready, because I think it is an interesting question.
They are concerned
What's that?
about it too, sir. They are very concerned
and they
about
should be, man. It's hard. And, quitting, when we say quit, man, it's a pejorative word, but, if we're going to talk about quit smoking, like that, then it's a good thing. So then it comes down to this really interesting dilemma. Is it okay to quit? Well, let me tell you about Sefton. Okay. And the Sefton's his real name. I know it was A1C Sefton. I even tried to track him down when I was retiring. There was about 15 or 20 Seftons on the global, and I wrote him notes because he was just a neat guy, and I always wondered what kind of happened to him, kind of partly because of this story, right? As you get near the end of your career, you start to reflect on things at the beginning, like you get a little bit more reflective, right? So I sent out a bunch of notes. I got some back. No, not me, but I don't know whatever happened to Sefton. But when I showed up from my first team, Sefton was the CQ. He was the guy kind of running the desk, and he was in casual status because he had tweaked his wrist a couple classes before, right? And you walk in, and Sefton, if you went around the room and tried to pick who was going to make it, man, Sefton's a dude you pick. He's a linebacker in high school, New Yorker, so he had that cool forget about it accent. Man, good looking guy, comfortable. He's like, hey, follow me, LT, I got you. Like if we ever went down Cadre Hall, we'd get dropped, right, for an hour. Sefton would walk out of Cadre Hall like, hey, man, did you know that Mulk's wife made cookies last night, right? You guys want some? Like, even the Cadre liked Sefton. And the Cadre, they didn't like anybody, but they liked Sefton, man. I loved him, man. He's just a really neat guy. Well, I think it's week 3, week 4. The numbers have attrited down. The class has been cut in half. Out of the first 80, probably half of them probably shouldn't have been there. We're 3 or 4 weeks in, so at least the last 40 or so are athletic. We all got a fighting chance at this point, right? And then the process is completely different, guys. So don't worry about the numbers now. Like when you show up, you are far more prepared than when we showed up. Like some folks didn't know what they were getting into. You guys do. So just keep doing what you're doing, and you got a chance, right? So anyway, it's Monday eval day. I just got finished doing my push-ups, and I'm looking down the line, and I'm seeing how everybody else is doing. And Sefton's on his knees, and he's kind of grabbing his wrist, and some of the cadre around, and there's concern on his face. And, you know, I understand he probably tweaked his wrist again. It was the wrist that we were worried about, right? So after PT or after the cows, we all get back together. I'm like, man, what's going on? He says, man, I think I'm screwed. I tweaked my wrist. And Captain Savino was our team leader now, Colonel retired Savino VS. We're like, hey, man, be cool. They're going to give you a couple of days. They'll tape it up. He's like, hey, I'm good, man. I got it. You're right. Well, that night, Sefton quit. And if you quit in the middle of the night, man, I guess you fill out the form, you put it in the team leader's door, and, man, I guess you go to the CQ desk and they call the base taxi and they come pick you up and they reclassify. And, man, I guess that's what happened. I don't know. I never quit, right? But that morning, I open up the door because I'm VS's roommate. I pull out the form and there's one. I'm like, man, hey, man, Sefton quit. And I remember VS was like, what? I go, yeah, he quit. I'm like, well, we didn't see that coming, right? So anyway, we press on. We do roll call that morning. There's a murmur amongst the group because, you know, when Sefton wasn't there, you got to announce it. And I'm telling you guys, and because you guys understand what happens there, that day we lost 20 guys. Like we lost 20 guys in 12 to 14 hours, you know, 15 hours of training day. And those that haven't been there are like, what? Why would that happen? Was it just a really hard day? Yeah, of course it was hard. It was slightly harder than the day before. They graduated slightly harder. But in their mind, it was like, man, if Sefton can't make it, I can't make it, right? And, man, I think Sefton's a great guy. And I wish I could have found out. But, man, screw Sefton, right? Like, Sefton doesn't get to choose my worth. And it took me because I was kind of like, man, seriously, Sefton's not going to make it. Then, man, I'm just still barely holding on, right? But I just want to make sure that your audience, the ones, whether they're going to go for it or they're going for other things in their life, man, don't let Sefton decide your worth, or don't let your peers decide your worth. And even at the pipeline, the cadre got go, no go authority, but they still don't get to decide your worth. Like you get to decide your worth, right? And I share that even with my own colleagues because we all got our insecurities, right? Peaches, I've been short since the day I was born, man. My earliest memory in kindergarten was being made fun of, right? So we've all got flanks exposed. Then the question is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to let it own you, or are you going to you know, use it for good, use it as an opportunity to grow? And that's, you know, that's so this idea of quitting is important because when I talk to folks, I was like, well, what if it wasn't for Sefton? And because I think that's a really great question. Like maybe, and that's why I wanted to ask Sefton, like, man, why'd you do it? And didn't work out for you, you know? Because you could say, well, he just transitioned into another job in the Air Force and he went and did great things. And that might be the case. But I would share with those that are going through that experience that if you decide to transition, one, don't do it in the moment. Make sure you're talking to your teammates because the moment never lasts. The memory does. The moment never lasts. But I'd also, if I could have coached Sefton knowing what I know now, I'd have told him to finish NDOC and then not graduate. Like take it to the very end just to prove to himself that he could have made it and then transition into something else. And I imagine there's cadre out there cringing because they're like, man, we got limited training resources. Man, I ain't worried about your limited training resources, Air Force. I'm worried about the health and welfare of the men and women that we love. And I guess I would just, not in the moment, man. Don't quit in the moment. And if at some point you decide you need to transition, man, finish your task first and then transition. And I just think that would have been a different story altogether. So, man, I just wanted to share that with you guys.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And there's two things in that. And if I happen to remember both of them, I'll hit them. But right now, I do often wonder with some of those folks that I went through with that quit, you know, and I already know some of them are extremely successful. Like, you know, there's a lieutenant, I think he retired as a full bird, or at least the Lieutenant Colonel Costal. You know, I went through NDOC with him and he ended up quitting, and he was one of my go-to. And at least as a young guy, because I went through when I was 17, and then I had my birthday, you know, while at NDOC and stuff like that. And so I'm young, I'm impressionable, I'm in a whole world that I have no idea what I'm doing, because I don't have the information, or also it's like, oh my gosh, I'm surrounded by these giant, Adonis looking people that there's no way in hell that they would quit. Yet they do. And some of them are successful, some of them aren't. And then, you know, you want to know what goes through their head, and do they actually think about that? Yeah. You know, maybe not every single day, but do they regret that decision? Yeah. And I think they do. And I've met a lot of people, like, they don't necessarily say, you know, I I really regret it. Everything since then has been terrible. I don't think it's like that. It's like that's still like, man, in a moment of weakness, or now that I have clarity, man, I really should have just hung in there. It wasn't really that bad. And that's what's wild about it, is when you think about everything that we've done, whether it's in the pipeline, operational, because the coldest I've ever been has for sure been operationally, not in training. I've been cold in training. Operationally is, that's a whole nother game. And it's just like once you're on the other side of that, it's never as bad as it was when you were going through it, at least in my opinion. And before I forget, and going to your other points, sir, about comparing yourself to other people. Sure. I mean, I was guilty of that too. And it's almost especially as a young person, you almost can't help it, but you got to understand when your septons quit or anybody else next to you, your buddy quits, right, and they're going to quit. Like the number, when you start with 120, 140 people, you're going to make friends and they're going to quit. You cannot let them determine what you do or whether or not you can make it, because, we've all said it before, and I'm sure you've said it too, sir. The pipeline is 20 or, the physicality versus mental. It's 80% mental, 20% physical. So that's just the reality of it. And you've got to be strong mind to get through. So,
well, I wonder, did Sefton see himself the way that you saw him? Because we talked to Trey Free a while back, and we talked about that moment when you first get that feedback from an outside source where they're like, bro, like, you're really good at this. Like, you need to like step up in these situations. And it never even occurred to you that like you were viewed that way. Like, do you think that he even knew that he was viewed as like the guy on the team, and what kind of influence he would have?
You said Trey Free, because man, Double D's, man, he's a great friend and great warrior, a great mentor of mine, a hero of mine, that's for sure. So I don't know about Sefton, but the question applies, and that's why it's important that we got folks that we let in, and you got to be vulnerable to your teammates so that we can have these personal conversations. I think a lot of folks going, whether they're starting the pipeline or they're in it right now, they think that they're supposed to walk around with muscles between their fingers and get the sleeve tattoo as fast as possible because they watch the folks, that are successful, and they think that's how they're supposed to be. And quite honestly, the ones that do really well in this business that last are the ones that say when they're nervous or when they're scared, so that they can let a little bit of pressure off. Or even when we think about the grief that we experience, man, I can hold it all by myself and my demons can eat me up, or I can visit it on my terms and I can talk about my grief or my hopes and my fears. And when I give it to you, man, I'm giving you part of it, but if for whatever reason it's not heavy for you and it lightens my ruck. And Trent, whether Sefton knew that he was that person or not, he suffered in silence, because I sure wish he would have knocked on Vinny's door and my door in the middle of the night and go, hey man, you guys got a second to talk, because I'm wrestling with demons right now. And man, no one fights alone. Despite what the movies look like in this business, no one goes on the X alone. We don't make it through the pipeline alone. In fact, quite honestly, if a person's ego swells because the attrition number goes up and less guys made it, that means they weren't necessarily the teammate that we needed them to be as well. Because where we should swell is when we look around, folks are to our left or right. If they need to break water for you, like I should get behind somebody and let them break water. Man, I got to swallow my pride and do that. If I'm the strongest one at the time, then man, they should be in my wake. But the more we can get through this, the better. And because selfishly, we need as much combat power as we can, because the adversary is going to keep generating numbers as well. So that's why in this business, whether you're in high school or you're at the age where you're trying this stuff, or you're in corporate, man, I don't want you to have to suffer alone, but to do that, you got to go first. You got to show each other that we're vulnerable, so that, man, someone can step inside and tell you the things you need to hear, even though you don't want to hear it. Or when you got some hopes and fears that you need to talk about, like you already have a relationship established, so you can go talk about it. When the storms blow or the demons come knocking on the door, that's not the time to realize you need a friend. And perhaps if Sefton had maybe a few more friends on the team, or had the confidence or courage to knock on our door, and who knows, he might be hosting Onesready right now. I do hope and pray that he's had a beautiful, brilliant life. And like you said, Peaches, man, they have every opportunity to go do that. Just because you said the words once doesn't make you a quitter. You can get back on your base, get back established, and you can make up for that. So hopefully folks out there that are watching this, if they've said the words before and they regret it, man, don't let it eat you up. Just recover, own it, and then learn from it and move back out again. Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, and you doing that for sure does not define you
Yeah.
or the rest of your life or anything like that. That is not
Yeah,
what
100%.
I'm saying in the slightest.
Well, also for some of the guys that are weaker in the water, let me just give you a heads up of what's going to happen. The cadre are going to go, hey, all we need is one quitter, and everybody goes to Taco Bell or Burger King or whatever the fast food restaurant of the day is. First off, don't believe them, because in the history of the pipeline, I don't think that's ever occurred. But what they're trying to do is, man, like one quitter. And I remember this one day, we're out at the Warhawk pool because Skylark was broken. So it's outdoor. It's December. We're just freezing, and we're all over there treading water, waiting to go do our mask and snorkel. And there's 8 of us, and it's Molt, I think, and he's walking up and down, and he's like, all we need is one quitter, and everybody's out of the pool, and I'm sitting there trying to get right, and I look around, and I see 7 dudes looking at me like, hey, BL, man, if you're going to quit, if you're going to, we don't want you to, but if you're going to, this would be a pretty good time to do it. We might get something out of it. And I'm like, hey, man, you got to stop looking at me, man. I'm getting ready for mask and snorkels. So I say that jokingly, but at the same point, those are the same 7 guys, because I don't know what the standard is now, but at the time it was 30 meters with a 720 on the wall. You know, you go 25 meters, touch the wall twice, come back and clear your mask, which is a long time for my little ass to be underwater moving, you know, and it always got tough. But the cadre got to where I always went last. And they would always make it sound like, hey, that's so that we can scare the LT. What they were trying to do is give me as much recovery time as possible, which I appreciate, you know. And then, but when I'm down there in the wall, the other 7 guys would all be done, and there would be faces in the water with their snorkels. And once I come off the wall, they would start yelling into their snorkel, and you could just hear the sound being carried through the water, and it was your teammates like, hey, you ain't alone, man. You got this, and it's really cool, man. It was really cool that. And all 8 of us graduated, but I just wanted to show. Jokingly, they were like, "Hey, if you're going to quit, now is a good time." But also, they were some of my biggest supporters, and there they are cheering for me. So, anyway, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's tough to quantify and articulate that brotherhood, that team, you know, being a good teammate and be like something like that. That sounds probably to somebody else who hasn't been in that situation, like that is just silly. Like, why would that get you going? Why does that comfort you? Like, what? I don't understand it. But having been in a situation like that, you know, in a pool session, and sometimes it's just something that's silly or something little like that it can just get you going. And also understanding that, like, your teammates care about you, and believe it or not, and you said this a little while ago, that I wanted to pull the thread on a little bit, but cadre actually do care. Like, regardless of what you think or what they say to you, they have a job and they're doing it for a reason, and they actually care about you and your performance and the outcome of, you know, whether you graduate or you quit.
Go ahead, Trent. I'm sorry.
You did. Just saying, you're destroying my whole reputation by telling me what I care about them. That's hurtful.
The first one is just this idea of teammates, and you know, when you crack a smile or you wink at each other when you're getting your ass handed to you, you know what I mean, or you know, who you are, Sergeant, whatever it is, man. It just means you're not suffering alone. But on the operational side, the real side of it, man, and this is just one area, but being underneath the ship in the dark of the night is one of the loneliest, spookiest places in the world, especially when you come in open water and there is some ambient light, and then you see the shadow coming, and then you got to find the ship and you got to find the keel. And it's just a spooky place. Like I've always said, if the boogeyman lives, it's underneath the keels of ships or underneath some of those piers that we got to move around, right? It's just dark and it's just spooky, but it is the coolest thing to just feel the tug of your buddy, because you're always attached to somebody down there. There's different team techniques, but nobody is ever unattached, whether you're on a Budweiser or whether you're on a pole or whether you're actually tethered to just your own swim buddy. It is just as comforting as can be to just feel his tug, or to just follow the line and go over there and put your hand on the back of him. You know what I mean? Just as you know, and it is just a comfort. You know, some of the toughest guys and men and women in the world, just that little comfort, like, hey man, here, I'm right here. You give a squeeze as you communicate to each other. it's just really special. You know what I mean? And in those moments, nothing else matters at that time. Like I said, the water is always cold, the rock's always heavy. But when you just feel that, man, it's just like nothing else matters. And it's pretty cool. But if I could talk about the cadre, and I'll share with you, man, and again, I'll suppress my ego. I don't. So my second team, I go all the way through again, and I get to the 4,000 meter fin swim after I ran the 6 miles, and I failed again. Like I failed it by about a minute again. So it looked like I was right on glide slope to do exactly what I did the last class, man. I wasn't moving any faster. You know what I mean? These little legs pushing the jet fins or the rocket fins, whatever we had, they weren't getting any faster, right? So then a week later, but this was the first, so because I failed the 3,500 and the 4,000 on the first class, that was it. You have to fail the eval twice. This time I passed 3,500. I failed 4,000. So I got another shot at 4,000, but I didn't have to run the 6 miles. So in my mind, man, there's a chance, right? There's a chance. And this is where I wanted to get to, Trent, as cadre and Peaches, is that so the team went to go do the dive chamber that day, and I stayed behind as they're doing dive physics. They went to go do chamber work. It wasn't dive chamber, it was the altitude chamber. And I stayed back because they gave me a few days to recover and I had to take the test again. So I show up at the Skylark all by myself, man. I'm sitting there rocking the little Speedo. That's a sight that, man, you don't want to think through, right? But as little drag as possible, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm just in the water ready to go, waiting for the cadre to show up. And Mark Eichmann showed up at the time, Master Sergeant Eichmann, later on, Captain Eichmann. He showed up and he was our commandant. And I remember thinking, like, he doesn't normally come to pool sessions. He's the commandant. Like, we don't see him very often, right? And he shows up by himself to count my laps. And I go, hey, Sergeant, can you give me when we swim laps, you kind of give us 1, 2, every 10 laps, you get down there and tell the cone head where they're at, right? So I take off and I'm going for a while. And underwater, it's the strangest thing, man. It could be 30 seconds or 30 minutes. It's just a strange phenomenon, right? And after a while, and you don't keep count yourself because you'll go mad if you try to count your own laps, right? You just want to get lost in the suffering, right?
Yeah.
And after a while, I'm like, I either haven't done 10 or Master Sergeant's not going to get on his hands and knees and tell the cone what number we're on, right? And every time I turn around, every now and then I go get a glance at him, and he's like reading the Reader's Digest. He like literally showed up with a little Reader's Digest. And then at the end, he pats me on the head, and he's like, all right, LT, you're done. And he starts walking out. And I'm like, hey, Master Sergeant, did I make it? Because this is all I needed to do to graduate NDOC, right? And he goes, yeah, you made it, LT. Good job. And he just walks out. And I remember thinking, like, I don't think that son of a bitch counted a lap. And I share that with you because you can imagine now that we've been in team rooms, or we've been in planning sessions, or we've been in some of the most important whiteboard sessions in the world before we go and invade, go do raids. And you just know how everybody gets input. And I just wished that I could have found out what that team meeting was like at NDOC, because there's guys out there like, hey man, standard is standard 80 laps, and LT either makes sure or he doesn't. And then, there's the group like, hey man, it's less than a minute. It's less than a minute, and they think I have potential. Whether they were right or not, I don't know. But and it just would have been really interesting to hear that conversation. And then in this instance, I think the Master Sergeant, who was a leader, goes, hey, man, I got it. Like, we're done talking about it. We don't take votes. We fight for a democracy, but leadership's not a democracy. And I think he went over there. And I share that with you because I think he saved a lap for me. I think I did 79 laps. Or I went as many laps until he finished his story, which might have been 65 for all I know. As slow as my little ass is, right? I share that with you because I spent when I talk about my ego, man, I don't think I met standards. I don't think I met standards when it came to swimming. Fortunately, I never had to swim against the Taliban because I think I probably would have beat them, right? But it wasn't necessarily there. And I always made the swims after that, of course, right? Because the standard is so much higher than what you need to do operationally. That's why it is the training standard, right? To make sure you're ready for operations. But I never got to ask Mark Eichmann because we lost him before I was able to have that conversation. So I just share with you guys, man, I've been trying to pay that lap back ever since. So anyway, the point was cadre talk about us. They care about us. They have a job to do. They have standards to uphold. But there's the human side to leadership as well. You know what I mean? And that's why if you're a person of character and you're trying to, you're always putting out, then perhaps there's a chance that something's going to break your way.
Oh, for sure. And I know I look like I'm frozen there, or at least on my end, but I had a similar situation where I failed the final eval of swimming, the 4,000 meter, and it was 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And I know, I'm Tony Alexander. He was the one counting, and he goes, and he straight up said, Peaches, standard's a standard, and you missed it by 2 seconds. Your reeval will be on Saturday. And it was just like, okay. And then, so I got a little peek into that conversation because Blake George, now Colonel Blake George, came over, and I could somewhat hear them talking about like, hey man, it's 2 seconds. Like, this guy has been on 3 indoc teams now. Like, and he's at the final eval, and it's me and Chan, right? One other dude. We had whittled down from 120 whatever people to me and another guy. And he's like, hey, standard is standard. 2 seconds. He missed it, and he'll re-eval. So yeah, I mean, it's tough at the time. Now I get it. But I get it. And at the same time, you're right. It is, there's a human aspect of it too. That's like, but Master Sergeant Eichmann, he probably, however many laps you did, he probably just started his stopwatch and said, or a timer, and at 80 minutes, wherever you're at, he's getting up and walk away. It's just, I wanted to see if you do it or not.
Anyway, I share that with you guys.
If you had it in you,
I
give
think
it all.
You guys can fin. Well, Peaches, you can fin about 58 seconds faster than me. But clearly the bulk of the community is out of the pool by 65 minutes, right? And then they get out of our way for the last 15 minutes to see if we can close gaps or not. But man, it is what it is, right? Yeah.
That still happens. That still happens with the OFD.
Yeah. Anyway,
even now, I am the last person out of the pool.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where the more you pour into it, the more you're going to get out of it. And then you'll see those situations over and over again. I know I've talked about it, but like, there are students that will fail an event, and because of the way that student is and interacts with their teammates and how much of themselves they're putting into the training, like, they're gone that day. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts. And then there's other students where like that investment is there, and you want to see them succeed. And so I think I always say investment breeds investment. If you want that kind of relationship with the cadre and your teammates and all those other things, like, they need to see it. So like, you say like you missed a lap or whatever, or someone did you a favor. I'm guessing, sir, that 99% of the rest of the time when you're not in the pool, like, you're pulling that team along, you're pulling other teammates along. You know what I mean? So like, it's not that they made up a new standard for you. It's that you were crushing the standard in all of the places, and you're a good teammate. So post Indoc, what kind of happened after that? You're a new team guy, and everybody wants to know what it's like to be a new team guy. So like, you show up on team, or if you want to talk about dive and all that other stuff, but like, what's the rest of the process like as you started growing to yourself?
I did my full tour there, and I tried out and went to the 2-4, but then you show up at the 2-3, you get a real team sergeant, you know what I mean, like a master sergeant that's been around. And as a lieutenant, that's, you show up and you fought through what it's like to lead an operational team. And when you get there, you realize, man, I've got commissioned authority, but the master sergeant's got all the juice. And again, that's why it comes back to this relationship again, man. Like, you gotta develop a relationship. For the young officers, you gotta develop a relationship with your team sergeant, troop sergeant, whatever the term is that you're using out there. And I hope that it includes a friendship, but I think this is a real important message. You guys don't have to like each other, but you got to love each other, because you're committed to looking after the airmen and executing the mission. So you might as well do the best you can to like each other and try to develop a relationship, a friendship. And that requires working out together, breaking bread together, spending time in the office together. And you don't got to go bowling together if it's not that type of relationship, but the airmen have got to see that you two guys hang out and that you two guys make decisions, and very quickly, because our young officers are so capable, they will assimilate information very quickly, and very quickly they will have the decision make. Their skills will catch up with their authority. But before it does, of course, man, and even after it does, you got to have a relationship to be able to take advice from the enlisted force, and specifically the team sergeant to get you through it. Man, my first team sergeant, Daryl Van Landingham, he always put me in a position to try to be successful. He didn't have an ego. He wasn't there trying to run the team and like LT sit in the back. Like, he did a really nice job just investing in me and working with him through me. And we had really good NCOs, and really we were cutting our teeth on airfield seizures, which I don't know if they still do them as often as we did. And I know the platforms may change the way they seize airfields, but for us, for young special tactics operators, it is a great mission to put it all together and to plan and execute complex things. And really, as an officer, in the Ranger Battalion, briefing and engaging and planning. I just got a lot of reps really early. Trent, one of the things, and Peach is one of the things that I don't regret doing is I volunteered for Ranger School, and I went and graduated on time, 10-93. And besides learning my field craft, because as an officer, I'm not going to get as many reps, at some point, or even on the same team trip, I'm just not going to get as many reps because there's other things I need to do to make sure that that the training plan stays on track and that our garrison responsibilities are being covered as well. So you got to get the reps while you can. And Ranger School got my field craft up very quickly. But more importantly, it taught me troop leading procedures or the planning process. So very early in my process, I got very good at joint language, joint planning, and my field craft was solid. I knew how to wear my kit. And this was before we had a year-long AST like Venya or STTS. We didn't get as many reps. You come out, you get a couple weeks on what we called green team at the time, and then you're out doing it. So Ranger School was a qualifier for me to give me some joint credibility and some joint skills. And then through the course of the 2-3, man, we got after it. And if you don't mind, I'll share another story. This is probably a year. In fact, when I was at Ranger School was when the Battle of the Black Sea happened, October 93. And we had heard about how we had lost, how the helicopters went down and we had lost Rangers. We had lost really good men. And I remember it was staggering to us being in Ranger School, hearing about it, just not seeing the news, but just the instructors talking about it and filling in the gaps. Well, I get back to my team and I job out for a while, and it's early 95, and the United Nations had concluded that the mission in Mogadishu was a failure. It's called UNISOM 2, United Nations in Somalia, and it's the second evolution of it. And they decided they were going to withdraw forces. And I remember Colonel Buck Melter was my squadron commander, and Captain Pat Barnett was my team leader. And they brought me in and they're like, hey, man, we think we got a mission because we got to send, 7 dudes over with 5th Special Forces Group, in advance of the 13th Marine Expeditionary Unit. And I remember Colonel Buckmelter saying, hey, I think you're ready. And then he goes, Captain Barnett, what do you think? And I knew Pat, and Pat's like, hey, sir, he's my assistant. He's my 2LIC, and he's definitely ready. Like, I believe in him. And I remember that specifically. One, I had a commander that trusted me, but I also had a captain that wanted to go get mission too. And instead of trying to hawk the mission, he's like, hey, man, I think the LT is ready. And I trust him, and let's go do it. I just thought that was really, it's always been a fond memory of mine that I've shared with BT, that I appreciate him vouching on my behalf. But I go over there, and I won't tell all the, I'll try to shorten the story. I want to just tell you this one day in particular. I was doing air traffic control on Mogadishu airfield, and I was working a couple CH-53s were about to come in with the Marines, and we're going to do a leader's reconnaissance. And a firefight broke out right outside the gate, and it was Adid and Ali Mahdi, the 2 Klansmen. And I had my spotting scope up. I had good defilade. I had high ground. I'm controlling the airfield, and this firefight broke out. I was a lieutenant, and it was really the first time I'd seen it. And man, they are just crushing each other. RPGs, crew serves, the technicals, the Dishkas, and I throw up my scope, and quite honestly, it is just fascinating to see it. I'd always heard about it, but to hear it, to see it, to smell it. And it went on, 30 minutes, which at the time that's a good clip of a firefight, man, even by today's standard, right? And then when it was done, I waved off the 53s. We acknowledged that the Marines, this probably wasn't the day to do a leader's recon, because that was as most activity we had in Mogadishu in a while. And I go back in as I'm heading back to the 5th group talk. I got to go through the international media camp, and as I go through, I could tell there's kind of a heaviness, because usually the international media, man, it's fun, man. There's rock and roll, and man, there's men and women, and they're doing what they do, right? It's fun. But I could just tell there was a heaviness, and I learned shortly after that the Italians had sent out a crew, because we had Italians as part of our task force. There was an Italian amphib off the coast, and they were flying Italian Harriers for us during the day. And the Italian special operators were our QRF, so we had a relationship with them. Well, they sent a news crew out there, and they couldn't find their cameraman. And they had learned later that he was shot and killed and just caught in the crossfire. And Adid's men had him. So later that night, we get the mission to control the Italian Super Puma that's going to come in, and they're going to repatriate his remains, right? So the next morning, I get out there early, and now I'm all the way at the front gate, because in Mogadishu and in a lot of places, they chew that khat, the narcotic that gets everybody high at night. So in the morning, they're all sleeping it off. So there's just one SF dude in me. There's not a big threat, and I'm down right by the gate. And I got the Super Puma coming in on good comms. I'm landing him. The vehicle's pulling up to the front gate. Man, I can see it like it was yesterday. they get out, man, I kind of do a thumbs up and I point to where the vehicle is to the Italian team leader. And he goes over there with 5 or 6 guys. They leave a couple of special operators right around the helicopter just for local security. And as they're doing international hand and arm signals with the deeds guys, I see him go into the ruck of a teammate, and he pulls out an Italian flag and a staple gun, and he staples the Italian flag to the wooden box. And I watch him kind of lug it back over and load up. I give him, man, thumbs up, air traffic control, man, I get him out of there. And as loud as the helicopter is when you're right next to it, when it takes off, the silence is equally deafening. I'm just sitting there in silence. And I tell you guys that, like, one, it was my first ramp ceremony. We didn't call it that at the time. And as the war picked up, man, we'd unfortunately become very familiar with that term. But I just wanted to share that with you because he asked me where I went on my first assignment. Trent, I grew up that day. Like, up to that point, man, I was having fun.
All right. Sorry, sir. Had some technical difficulties, but I definitely wanted to have you finish that story because it was a really good one. So you were talking about how you grew up in Mogadishu.
Yeah, you bet, Peaches. So it was talking about just the mission where they were repatriating the remains of the Italian journalist, and we had just the Italians had just loaded his remains up, and at the time I didn't realize it was my first ramp ceremony, and that we would have plenty later on, and I didn't know it then. But as the helicopter's right next to us, man, we're used to it being really loud. In fact, as communicators, we're taught how to not let it get you excited so that you don't start shouting because everybody else isn't there and they can hear it fine. So, I'm working my heart rate. I'm keeping it all down. But when it departs, as loud as the helicopter is right there, the silence is equally deafening. And folks that have been around airplanes know that. Like, when it leaves, you're like, wow, that was really loud. But then the silence is equally deafening. And it was in that moment as I sat there that I grew up. Like, I professionally grew up that day. And it's an important day in my life because up to that point, man, I was having fun jumping out of airplanes, man. I was doing the things that I wanted to do. But it was at that moment in time that I realized that if you have the ability to take lives and save lives, you got to be really good. And it's like that day I set really high standards for myself. Like, if this is what I'm going to commit my adult life to, then it's important that we establish high standards and we constantly pursue them. Like, I realized that, man, we're going to stumble along the way as we go for it, right? But anyway, that was a day that I grew up. Trent, you'd asked me kind of coming out of it, what was my next assignment like? That was a formative experience for me as a young man. I had really good senior NCOs, NCOs. I had good friends on the team. And, as they come out of the pipeline, the officers will wrestle with, hey, what's the difference between a friend and a teammate, a colleague, and somebody who I have authority over? And they're going to be just fine with that. Like, service is on their heart. Some guys will manage it a little bit better than others early on. I'm not worried about that. As everybody gets into their roles, they'll figure out who does what to who. And our young men and women are savvy enough to manage what some other forces may challenge with fraternization. I think our guys settle into the authority role really well. But I grew up, and then when I grew up, I realized if this is what I am going to go do for a long time, then I want to be really, really good at it. And I want to have high expectations of myself and of others. Before I close it out, though, we talked about catastrophic comm failure. Man, I got to tell you another formative experience from one of my instructors at the 24th, Jeff Bray. Jeff, Silver Star recipient from the Battle of the Black Sea, Black Hawk Down. Rest in peace, man. I went to his burial up in Arlington a few years back. But he was one of our instructors at OTC, and really early in our process, we were going through airfield seizure, the SOP, and it's like, what do you do if you don't make comms? And we thought the question was the priorities of work. Hey, sir, you gotta clear the runway. Yeah, what do you do if you don't make comms? You got to establish the box, which is kind of our way of no comms. They no, what do you do if you don't make comms? And you got to have your flare range. Like, what do you do if you don't make comms? And he just kept asking us, and finally, like, you make freaking comms, man. And he goes, then what do you do if you don't make comms? And then we realized you make comms. And what do you do if you don't make comms? You make comms. And the point is, as a professional communicator, like, you never just, well, shit's not work, or excuse me, stuff's not working today. Like, in your audience didn't see it, but I already had my phone set up on the side as my backup comms that was already linked up. So as soon as this channel went down, man, almost instantly we pop up in the other channel. I say, hey, man, catastrophic comm failure. Do you want to push to this, or do I have time to bring my primary radio back up? And I just share that. One, Jeff Ray, who's one of the finest operators I ever worked with, was a good friend. We lost him way too early. But to our communicators out there, man, if you don't make comms, what are you going to do? you're going to make comms.
Make comms.
So anyway, over to you guys. Thanks.
No, sir, it's great. But like speaking of high expectations and like lasting impact is what I was thinking of. And we were talking about that team leader, team sergeant relationship earlier. I know you had authored that little blue book when you were over in at the group. And I just have to tell you, like that word that you used, because you were talking about the relationship, the word in the book was intimate. And it was, I don't want to say it was funny, but like we made jokes about it inside the team room, but I will never forget that. And like my expectations for what my team leader and I should be and how we should communicate and how we should interact has always been driven by that. And so I just wanted to bring it up while you're here is, you know, I think I saw that with you and SG when he was your number one.
Yeah.
I mean, and he was one of the scariest people I've ever met in my life, by the way. But it really shaped that relationship between like the first time when I was a team sergeant with K-Dub. It was we talked about it all the time, and you made a huge impact there with that.
Yeah, good. Thanks. First off, a bunch of folks put effort into the book. Thank you. Sean Gleffy, SG, was our chief, and we worked with a handful of folks that we trusted, and we tried to get it right. I've always liked the word professional intimacy because the word intimacy causes tension among operators, and that tension forces you to wrestle with it. And what does it mean, man? Man, I'm not talking about spooning. What I'm talking about is being professionally close and vulnerable with each other so we can read each other. And quite honestly, Trent, if you were my senior enlisted, that you tell me what I wanted to hear, but I needed to hear. And to do that, man, I got to have this professional, intimate relationship with you. You know, really what the senior NCO and the young officer has to do is they have to clarify roles. They have to exchange expectations. They have to be open about it, and they got to do that in private, and they got to get it right. And fortunately, man, we've had our share of folks that have gotten it right. We've seen some not get it right, where the officer and the enlisted didn't get along real well. It's catastrophic when it happens at the squadron level, but I've seen it where it's a beautiful thing. At the 24th, my first time there, Jeff Buckmelter was the squadron commander, JB, plank holder, Det 1, Makos, and his chief, Tim Brown, TB. And where the headquarters building was, I don't know, less than a quarter mile away down the hill, but still you had to make an effort if you were going to go down to the team room, right? And I tell you guys with 100% certainty that if I was in my office or I was in the bay or in the team room and the door opened up and, Colonel Buckmelter, JB, walked through, there's 100% certainty that TB was right behind him, or vice versa. If TB came in, we said, "Hey, Chief, what's going on?" JB was right with them. And they just modeled that there's no daylight between the officer and the senior enlisted, because, man, it takes both of them to kind of get the perspective right and to make the really, really difficult decisions as they work on it. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you.
Oh, that's great. And you obviously took that into your civilian life after retiring and stuff like that, because you created the Intrepid Leadership Group, which is obviously on your shirt as well. So appreciate the advertisement. We'll have to plug the hell out of that, right? Because yeah, I hear you. Because you guys is doing a lot of great things out there, not just for corporate and still within the military. Because you guys are coming back. I mean, you've come back and did pro dev for us when I was at the 23rd. But you're doing some amazing things with doing kids camps as well. So please dive into Intrepid, if you will.
Yeah, you bet. So I stood up Intrepid after being retired for a couple of years to just kind of go back and teach an audience that maybe wanted to learn. I taught high school for a few years. It took me 3 years to figure out what you guys already knew about me, and that's I'm too intense for public education, right? So teaching's always been on my heart, and really just tried to create a market and a product where maybe I could be with an audience that was a little bit more interested in learning. But the first 2 years, I've always talked about the relationship between officers and senior NCOs. I'm convinced God created senior enlisted for officers, and really to give us courage, because there's times I didn't know what to do, and clearly I needed senior enlisted or enlisted to coach me and to guide me. But even later in life, like I knew exactly what needed to be done, but I didn't know if I had the courage to do it. You wanted to be popular with the guys. You had to make a call that was hard, and that relationship with the senior enlisted that had more reps than me, more experience than me, always gave me courage. So in the curriculum that we have in Intrepid on leader development, I've always talked about that relationship, but it wasn't for a couple of years until I could get my hands on Charlie McCarney, Charlie Mike, one of my chiefs, and now Mike Atkins, another chief, just so that when we're on the road, instead of just talking about it, we can now model it, and we talk about it. If I'm teaching Charlie Mike will be in the corner. He's kind of doing overwatch, like support by fire. One, he'll come in with a different dimension, a different perspective. But also, at the end of the day, as we're syncing up, he's giving me, hey, like you lost this guy, or you might have wounded this person with your comments, or this one might have misread you a bit. And what he's doing is, at the end of the day, we're comparing how the day went and figuring out what the next day looks like. And it's just wonderful to have someone that you trust right by your side to do that. And quite honestly, in the corporate space, we teach them you got to look for that, because corporate doesn't build it like that. You know what I mean? Like they don't build the 2-person team together. It's just a blessing that we have in the military for the reasons why, man, our stakes are higher. We don't have a profit and loss sheet, but you guys, your guys' margins are they're more important. It's national defense, and it's airmen's lives, soldiers' lives. So that's kind of, what's what we're doing in that space. We do mission planning as well. We go back and teach, the military decision-making process. But I'd like to tell you about our kids camp. Every summer we run a leadership camp for teenage boys, ages 15 to 18. And we bring them in, we take them to the woods, we teach them small unit tactics. North American Rescue representatives come out and teach TCCC, so tactical critical casualty care, and really what we use, and then we issue them paintballs, and we give them missions that they have to plan. They do map and compass work, and really what it is a platform, and to go have to do something as a team. It is about developing team leadership, team followership, and then confidence. That's ultimately what the course is about. But they have to go do something together. And we found that paintball is a great stress inoculator. And as I'm walking through, along with Colonel Rowland, one of our Gold Star parents, and Matthew Rowland's father, him and I will walk together. Charlie Mike, one of our chiefs, will be there. And if the guys are doing really well, we've got either hand and arm signals, or we got radio calls that allows the OPFOR to turn it up and challenge them more. If they're struggling, then we can dial it down a little bit and teach them how to control their heart rate, and dial back in. And it's just really neat. Early in the process, when they get hit, man, the pain hurts. It's not devastating, but when you're 15 years old and you catch a few, paint to the neck, man, it gets your attention. And you see early in the week, they want to shy away from it. And then we remind them, man, you still got a mission, because they don't respawn after they get hit. We just tell them, man, your tactics suck and you got to keep doing what you're doing. Right. So they'll come out, by the end of the week, they're like, man, look how many times I got hit and I didn't flinch. You know what I mean? I'm like, well, you're not trying to get hit, guys. You know what I mean? But it becomes kind of a badge of honor that they can handle the stress and stay on task. And it's just fun to really watch them as they build up to the final rescue mission, which is a helicopter down in a shanty village up in Muscatatuck Urban Training Center. The Indiana Army National Guard sponsors us going up there. And we give them some pretty sophisticated training events for just as young men to just kind of grow as a team. And along the way, Colonel Rowland, testifies on his son's behalf. So we do a fireside chat about our Gold Star program. And we've had some Gold Star family members come through, and we have a leadership reaction course we put them through. We use Gallup Strengths Finders to help them find out kind of what their top 5 strengths are. And the world will tell them what they suck at. We're there to tell them what they're really good at, and to try to, leverage those natural strengths. And we go through the course of the week. We get to work with Core Combat Sports, Rolando Haddad and his family here in Louisville, just to give them a couple blocks on combatives. And it's important. Like we use some of our military background to teach them service and to give them skills that we think will work no matter what they do. We're not trying to convince them to go in the military. We are trying to convince them to use their skills for good and to serve others. Some might think it is militant. It is not militant. It is military. And there's a big difference between the two, just like the difference between harsh and hard. And I teach my leaders, you got to be hard on your airmen, but that's far different than being harsh. Harsh has a pettiness to it, so at times we're hard on them as they go through, but it's all because we care about them. But we have a lot of fun. And anyway, we do those once a year. I wish we could do more, but it's easier to seize a small country than it is to run this camp. It fatigues us. Everybody that does it is a volunteer. The tuition that we ask goes directly towards supplies, and we're not making any money off of it. I assure you that. And then we get to partner with some great organizations and some great people that believe in it. And besides just a bunch of my old teammates that I know really well, Wes Brooks comes out, Kerry Miller comes out. We got some younger dudes, Chuck Edwards, Matt Burnell. We try to get some younger controllers out there. And, the funny thing is I can teach my sons all day long about things, men of character, or even how to use a map and compass. but you get a controller out there with a sleeve tattoo and cooler sunglasses than me, and for whatever reason now it must be right. So our theory is, yeah, we can teach our own sons, but they don't want to listen, so why don't we teach each other's sons? And we're lucky that, I don't know, about a third, 25% of the folks that come through have some relationship with us through the AFSPEC horror community, but we're real fortunate that the word gets out and other folks have come in as well. So, man, 2023 has been laid on. It's 18 to 23 June is when we're going. We got 18 slots. John Chapman's nephew is going to come this time. His namesake is also John. We'll get a Derek Argel's son has been through. And then what's neat about the camp is the last few years we've started inviting back graduates they all do a really good job, but we'll invite back a handful of graduates every year to act as junior mentors, so that besides now it's not just old dudes or, we've got some guys that are closer to their age also participating and helping out as well. So it's pretty cool, man. Our graduates just continue to grow, and we keep tabs on all of them. And, we've got folks out there doing some really neat stuff. So that's a little bit about our camp. I appreciate you asking.
Oh, that's great. And I wanted to ask because I find it fascinating and at the same time, like, also thankful that you guys are doing that because, for whether it's you guys or whether it's other folks that are doing these kind of kids camps, like, I think it's really important for, just boys and girls in general to really, I think we're going to be entering some very difficult times here pretty soon in the next, 10 to 15 years, if not earlier. But, and I think it's important that we prepare the children and the young men and women for the road versus preparing the road for them, keeping them in a bubble. So definitely appreciate it. Going back to what we talked about as kind of a parting shot for you. And I mean, there's so many nuggets in this thing anyway that you've said, but what kind of advice would you give to those men and women that are wanting to join AFSPEC War?
Yeah, you bet, man. So, when Intrepid teaches, and Trent, you even asked us what was my why. Our tagline for Intrepid when we're doing corporate training is why you. And, I kind of added like, like almost poking them in the chest, like, why you? Like, and we used to say, why do you do what you do? And Mark Twain once said, if I had more time, I'd written a lot less. So we've distilled it down. That's like our guiding question. Why you? And first you got to get right with you. And then you got to get right with your teammates, see yourself before you can see the enemy, see the terrain. But, so the question that I would have for the younger generation is why not you? Man, if this is what you want, then go get you some. I've already talked a little bit here about, man, the world will tell you that you suck. Folks will tell you what you can't do. Man, I want to see what you can do. And man, I want you to just go for it. And if you go for it and get it, it's going to be quite the ride. And, decades from now, hopefully you'll have your opportunity to pass on some of your stories. But even if you come up a little short on this one, the fact that you had the guts to try means it's just going to enable other things for you. So, man, I certainly, they don't want to hire me to teach them how to do a stroke in the water. That's for sure. Like, that's the last thing they need to do. But I think they could look at our stories, and realize that it doesn't come easy for hardly anybody. There's so few people that just glide through the pipeline, which is why it's important. You got to wrestle with your ego. There's times to keep it in check, and there's times when you say, man, screw this, and nothing is going to stop me. I don't care what they say. And then make sure that they know they don't have to suffer in silence, that they, no one fights alone, that they're good teammates the entire way through, and they love their person to the left and right. Whether they like them, man, I could give a crap, but they should love them because they've got the courage to go for it too. And I'll share with them that, while we've got our pipeline and all the things that we're trying to do, our adversary does too. And they're really clever. The ones that have survived conflict with us, they survive because they're really, really good. And they've got their own pipelines. They've got their own guest speakers, man. They probably got their own freaking podcast, and they're really good, and they're waiting to come see us. I grab something here if you don't mind, because I know when I'm out there with some of the units right now, they're like, man, we missed out on the war. I don't know if this will show up on the camera, but this right here, when I was in Pakistan for a year, the Marriott there in the Islamabad got blown up. And in fact, I was on a secure line with a good friend of mine, Mason Dooley, who's my ops officer back at the unit. And it was so loud that he heard it. And I'll tell you, it was like, as a crow flies, it was 5 miles away, but the explosion was so powerful. I thought the embassy had just gotten hit. So I hung up with them and I grabbed my rifle. I was in a secure space and I went down to I thought they were coming through the gate, and the ambassador's residence was right there. It's late at night because even though the Department of State Day is on Pakistan hours, of course, when I finished my work there in the embassy, then I transitioned to the work at night with the task force around that we're working with and the unit back home. So there wasn't a lot of presence. And when I came out there, man, there was the guard, a couple Marines were starting to show up, and I'm there, and it wasn't our compound. That's how loud it was. Well, we have folks living in safe houses down in some of our government partners that we work with. They all start checking in, and we realized that the Marriott had been hit. My team and I were just there 2 days earlier. It was the only restaurant safe enough for us to go to. There was a Thai restaurant there that we go about every other week just for a team dinner, because it's really the only place you can meet outside the embassy grounds that was safe enough. And obviously it wasn't even secure enough. And that night, after everybody checked in, we were still missing one government partner and the ambassador. And we asked if we could go look for him at the hotel, and the ambassador allowed me and one other to go down there. And as we were crawling through the hotel to try to get to his room, and we couldn't, because his room was like the whole wing was on fire. But on my way out, I just saw this laying there, and I grabbed it. And now it's in an old disc. That shows my age. Back then, we actually still had floppy disks. But I put it in there, and I just share it with you to just remind you the nature of some of the adversary out there, that they just that they don't believe with what we stand up for. And there's folks out there that are afraid that they missed out. Unfortunately, they haven't. I wish that we could just enjoy long-standing peace. I know the pipe hitters out there want to go strap it on. Scotty Fales, back at the 24th, always told us as a team sergeant, be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. And we did, and it was probably more than we bargained for, right? Yep. A lot of us know that. Some of you far more than me, of course. But the ones that are out there that are still going through training, the ones that are young in the units, man, just wait, man. Keep your kit tight. Just always be ready to go, because at some point they're going to try us again, and the nation's not going to have any choice but to respond. And our teammates, you guys, are the ones that are going to go get after it. So, man, why you in the corporate world? Why not you? When you're younger, man, don't let anybody hold you back. If this is what you want, then go get you some, and listen to the podcast. Listen to your coaches, your mentors, your teachers, and just prepare yourself, mind, body, and spirit, as best you can, and then go for it, man. And just don't quit in the moment. You know what I mean? Just don't quit in the moment. Cool.
Yeah. Well, I can't follow that up, but I definitely appreciate you joining the podcast, sir. I know that you were telling me beforehand, like, you weren't sure coming on, so hopefully this was beneficial for you, because I know that, and just like all the times before when you were my group commander, and then before that, and even when you came out to give pro dev, it's always a journey, and I always learn something talking with you. So I definitely appreciate you joining us, and thanks for everything that you're doing for the units when you go out there and teach, and what you've done for us in the past. So that's us out here. We appreciate you joining us. Guys. Everybody.